Hey there, deep divers. Welcome back. You know how we usually dig into all those articles and research? Well, today, we're switching things up a bit. We're going to be taking a deep dive into something a little different.
Interesting. So what have we got?
A series of conversations with an AI chatbot.
Oh, wow. That's a unique kind of source material.
It is. But it actually gives us this really interesting opportunity. We can kind of peek into someone's raw, unfiltered thoughts, as they deal with some pretty heavy stuff.
I see it. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Family drama,
Yeah.
workplace conflicts, even the long-term impact of childhood bullying, all kinds of things.
Sounds intense.
It is. And the user starts off by talking about this live-in job they have, and they're really ashamed of it.
Oh, why is that?
Well, it's because a coworker keeps asking all these intrusive questions about their personal life.
Oh, that's awful. So they feel like they can't set boundaries because they're afraid of becoming, the target of gossip.
Exactly. And it's interesting because the chatbot actually offers validation and even suggests some neutral responses. It's almost like it's coaching the user on how to deal with this nosy coworker, without being super confrontational.
Ah, I see. Like giving them the tools to kind of deflect those questions. So is that working? I mean, is the user taking the advice?
Well, that's where things get complicated. The user reveals they ended up retaliating against this coworker.
Retaliating.
Yeah.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, it actually ended pretty badly. Multiple people ended up getting fired, including the user themselves.
Oh, wow. That's really sad.
Yeah. And you can just feel the regret and guilt coming through in the user's words. It makes you think, what pushed them to that point?
Yeah.
Was it like a slow burn, or was it one thing that just sent them over the edge?
Yeah, I wonder. It could be any number of things, right? Maybe a buildup of resentment, or I don't know, maybe they felt so backed into a corner that it was just like a desperate attempt to regain control.
Right, exactly. Like a last resort.
Tough situation.
It is. And as if losing their job wasn't bad enough, the user then starts talking about their relationship with their cousin, David.
Oh, what about him?
Well, so David offers them a place to stay, which is nice, right? But it comes with all these strings attached, like super controlling rules and constant put-downs.
Yikes. That sounds really tough.
It is. And David comes across as so dismissive, almost oblivious to his own privilege. He criticizes the user's exercise routine. He boasts about his family's wealth and accomplishments. It's like he's constantly trying to make the user feel inferior.
Ugh, that's frustrating.
Yeah, you can practically feel the user's confidence shrinking under David's constant gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Yeah, he denies things that he said,
Okay.
He makes excuses. He twists situations around to make the user look like the problem. It's classic manipulation.
So how does the user respond to all of this? I mean,
Yeah.
have they tried to confront David about how they feel?
They're clearly conflicted about it. They mentioned that David is older, he's successful, and the whole family seems to adore him.
I get it. It's like his success acts as a shield.
Exactly. And it protects him from any accountability. The user even starts to blame themselves, accepting this awful treatment because they feel goofy and lower functioning than everyone else.
Wow. That's heavy. So how does this all play out with the rest of the family?
Not well. The user mentions being bullied by David during family gatherings. It gets so bad that they start avoiding those events altogether.
Understandable, but then what?
Well, because they're not going to these family events, the entire family starts resenting them.
Oh, no. So it's like a lose-lose situation.
Exactly. David's toxic behavior has poisoned the well for everyone. And then we get another layer of complexity added to the whole situation. The user admits to their own history of verbal and emotional abuse towards their family.
Whoa. Okay, so things are getting even more complicated now.
Right. They talk about feeling burned out, unable to meet their family's demands for time and support. It's clear that there's a lot of hurt and resentment on all sides.
So much going on in this family. It's like a tangled web of relationships and emotions.
And then the user reveals their struggles with their narcissistic mother. Apparently, the whole family is fixated on helping her, but the user is at their limit. They just can't keep giving and giving.
I see. So that's creating even more tension and resentment within the family.
Absolutely. And then the guilt just keeps piling on. The user confesses to emotionally abusing their grandmother.
Their grandmother. Oh my gosh. What happened?
Well, they were actually influenced by some terrible advice from a previous therapist.
What? Really?
Yeah, can you believe that?
That's awful.
It is. And on top of all this emotional turmoil, the user's dealing with some real-world struggles too. They're living in a bad house, they have a long commute, they're constantly worried about finances.
Wow. Sounds like they're drowning in stress.
They are. And then we get this flashback to their childhood. It really sheds some light on where some of these patterns might have originated.
Okay, this is interesting. Tell me more.
So the user describes this Jewish summer camp they went to. And apparently bullying and disrespect were not only present, but almost encouraged.
What? By who?
Particularly by the camp owner. It's almost like the seeds of the user's current struggles were planted way back then.
Makes sense, especially if they were young and impressionable. But what's really fascinating is how the user seems to have internalized this whole experience. They actually came to believe that it was okay for people to treat them disrespectfully.
Yeah, it's wild. Instead of recognizing the camp as a toxic environment, they actually blame themselves and kind of just shut down.
It really shows you the lasting power of those early experiences,
Yeah.
especially when authority figures are involved.
Yeah, it's like their whole worldview got shaped by this negative experience.
So what happened next?
Well, here comes the real head-scratcher. Years later, the user encourages their younger cousin to attend that same camp.
What? Really? Why on earth would they do that? It seems completely illogical.
I know. Why would anyone recommend such a negative environment to someone they care about? But that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We're trying to make sense of these seemingly illogical choices, try to understand the thought processes behind them.
Absolutely. There's got to be a reason.
So the user explains that they felt the camp's guidance and networking opportunities outweighed the negative aspects.
It almost sounds like they're trying to convince themselves that the ends justify the means, like rationalizing a bad situation.
Totally. It's a dangerous kind of thinking. It normalizes a harmful environment just because there might be some perceived benefits. And get this, they actually worked as a counselor at the camp for 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay, so it wasn't just a passing recommendation. They were actively involved in this place. What was really going on at this camp?
Well, the user starts to pull back the curtain on the camp owner's practices. And they're pretty abusive. They specifically mention the dunking of girls, like where boys would grab the girls and throw them in the water. That's awful. That's not just harmless fun, it's a total violation of boundaries.
Exactly. And it normalizes aggression and disrespect towards girls. It establishes this really unhealthy power dynamic.
So the camp owner allowed this to happen.
Yeah. And it gets worse. The user claims the camp owner enabled bullies, especially within the popular group.
That's terrible. So it sounds like this camp was creating this toxic hierarchy where some kids thrived at the expense of others.
It was. And we're left wondering, in their role as a counselor, did the user challenge this system at all? Or did they just perpetuate it? Maybe out of some misguided sense of loyalty or a need to fit in. It's a question we'll have to consider as we continue this deep dive.
It's a question worth considering for sure. It really does paint a complex picture, doesn't it? We've got this person struggling with all these internal and external pressures. They're carrying this weight of past trauma, navigating this really dysfunctional family, and facing all these real-world stressors. It's a lot. It is. It really is. And yet, amidst all this chaos, there are these glimmers of self-awareness. The user expresses regret for their actions. They seek guidance from the chatbot. And they even acknowledge the harm that they've caused. It makes you think maybe there's a desire to change, like a flicker of hope buried under all of that.
Absolutely. There's definitely a desire to change there. But it's like these positive impulses are constantly overshadowed by this really strong theme of self-blame.
Okay.
It comes up over and over again in their interactions with the coworker, their acceptance of David's manipulation, even the way they describe their own abusive behavior.
Yeah.
It's like they've internalized this belief that they somehow deserve this bad treatment, that it's their fault.
And you can see how that all ties back to the summer camp experience, right? I mean, if bullying and disrespect are basically normalized by the adults in charge, then it's no wonder a child would start to believe that it's their own fault for being targeted.
Exactly. And it creates this vicious cycle. If you believe you deserve bad treatment, you're less likely to set boundaries or stand up for yourself. You might even unconsciously seek out situations that confirm that negative self-image.
Which could explain why they were drawn back to that camp, both as a counselor and in recommending it to their cousin. It's like they were trying to fix something to prove that they could handle it, or even maybe find some benefit in it this time around.
It's a very human response to trauma, trying to regain control, trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense. But sometimes those attempts can lead us down paths that ultimately cause more harm than healing.
And we can't forget about the user's admissions of their own abusive behavior either. They talk about being verbally and emotionally abusive to their family, neglecting their father, even being cruel to their grandmother. It's heavy stuff.
It is. And it's crucial to acknowledge the harm caused by those actions. But we also have to consider the context. You know, this user is clearly struggling with their own demons. They have this history of trauma, and their present-day life feels incredibly chaotic and unstable.
Right, it's like we can't condone the abuse, but we also can't ignore the fact that hurt people often hurt people. It's this cycle that can be incredibly difficult to break.
And you know, that detail about the user's previous therapist is particularly disturbing. To be advised to engage in emotional abuse, especially towards an elderly person, is simply unconscionable.
I know. It's just a stark reminder that not all therapists are created equal. And even more importantly, it highlights how vulnerable people can be manipulated, especially when they're already in such a fragile emotional state.
It's possible that the user, in their desperation for help, latched onto this therapist's advice,
Yeah.
you know, seeing it as a solution or a way to cope. But that's the danger of harmful guidance.
Yeah.
It can really distort your perception and lead you down paths that you wouldn't otherwise consider.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the user's story. They're both a victim of abuse and a perpetrator of it. It's a messy, uncomfortable truth that we have to grapple with.
It is. It's a reminder that human behavior is rarely black and white. People are capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty. And often those impulses exist within the same person. The challenge is trying to understand the root causes, the triggers, and the cycles that perpetuate these behaviors.
So we've got this picture of someone who is wrestling with a lifetime of baggage. They're struggling to break free from these patterns of self-blame and abuse. But there are those glimmers of self-awareness too, that desire to change.
Yes, and that willingness to confront their own darkness is a powerful first step. It suggests that there's hope for growth and change. But it's also clear that they're at a crossroads. They're facing this mountain of challenges, and their family dynamic seems more like a minefield than a support system.
And we can't forget about the practical realities of their situation either. They're dealing with a bad living situation, a long commute, financial worries, concerns about their family's future. It's like all these stressors are creating this pressure cooker that's ready to explode.
Oh, absolutely. It's so important to acknowledge the impact of external factors: poverty, unstable housing, lack of support. All these things can contribute to mental and emotional instability. And it makes it even harder to cope with past trauma or to make positive changes in your life.
So we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've explored the user's anxieties, their regrets, some truly questionable choices. We've seen how past trauma can shape present-day behavior, and how even well-intentioned actions can have some really unintended consequences.
It's true. And what really strikes me is just the sheer complexity of it all. We can't simply label this person as a victim or a villain. They're both and neither. They're a human being grappling with a lifetime of experiences, some positive, many negative, all of them shaping who they are and the choices they make.
It's a sobering reminder that there's always more to the story than meets the eye, and that even in the most seemingly dysfunctional situations, there's a human being worth trying to understand.
Wow.
So what does all of this mean for our listeners? Why should they care about this one person's messy, complicated story told through conversations with a chatbot?
Because it's a microcosm of the human experience. It's about the struggles that we all face, the choices that we make, the consequences that follow. It's about the power of those early experiences to shape our beliefs and behaviors even years later.
It's about the courage to confront our own darkness, to acknowledge the harm that we've caused, and to seek a path towards healing. It's also about the importance of compassion, both for ourselves and others, as we try to navigate the complexities of life and relationships. It really gets you thinking, about those connections in our own lives. You know what I mean? We tend to focus on those surface-level issues, but this deep dive is showing us how much those early experiences can shape our beliefs, our behaviors, even years later.
Yeah, it's almost like this ripple effect, That summer camp experience with its normalized bullying and disrespect seems to have really set the stage for so many of the user's struggles later on in life.
It's like they learned to accept mistreatment as something they deserved. And that belief just keeps popping up again and again in their fear of setting boundaries with the coworker, their tolerance of David's manipulation, even their own admissions of abusive behavior.
It's tough to see that cycle of self-blame playing out. Like they're almost drawn to situations that just confirm their negative self-image.
Which brings us right back to that decision to recommend that same summer camp to their younger cousin. I mean, on the one hand, it's so hard to understand. Why would you expose someone you care about to that kind of environment? But on the other hand, maybe it was the user's attempt to reclaim some power, to find meaning in that painful experience.
It's a common response to trauma. We try to make sense of the senseless. You know,
Hmm.
we try to regain control. But sometimes those attempts can lead us down paths that cause more harm than healing. And in this case, it seems like the user might have inadvertently perpetuated that cycle of abuse.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it? Like, we can empathize with their struggles, but we can't condone choices that put others at risk. It raises questions about responsibility, accountability, those unintended consequences that can ripple outward and affect those around us.
For sure. And it makes those admissions of abusive behavior towards their own family even more troubling. This user is both a victim and a perpetrator. It's a messy, uncomfortable truth, but one that we have to confront.
Right. It reminds us that hurt people often hurt people. Breaking free from those cycles takes real self-awareness, courage, support. And that's where I see a glimmer of hope in the user's story. They express regret for their actions, they seek guidance, they acknowledge the harm they've caused. Maybe there's a capacity for change there, a desire to break free.
Those are really important first steps, but we can't overlook those very real challenges that they're facing either. That bad living situation, the long commute, the financial worries, the constant strain of that family drama, all of these external stressors can create this pressure cooker environment that makes it even harder to heal and grow.
So much to unpack here. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What can we learn from this one person's messy, complicated life? Revealed through conversations with an AI chatbot, no less.
Well, for me, it's the interconnectedness of it all. You see how early experiences can cast these really long shadows, how self-blame can become this self-fulfilling prophecy,
Yeah.
and how these cycles of abuse can repeat themselves across generations.
It's like a reminder that we all carry baggage. Our choices have consequences. And breaking free from harmful patterns, that's a lifelong journey.
But it's also a testament to that human capacity for change, for self-awareness, for seeking connection, even in the midst of pain.
This deep dive has been about peeling back the layers, revealing the vulnerabilities and contradictions that make us human, recognizing the impact of our actions, both the harm that we inflict and the potential for healing and growth.
And with that in mind, we'll leave you with this final thought. What patterns are you repeating in your own life? What cycles need breaking? How can you use this awareness that we've talked about today to create a more positive healing path forward? It's not an easy task, but it's a worthy one.
That's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? It's not about finding all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, the ones that make us think a little deeper, feel a little more raw, and maybe even see ourselves a little more clearly. Thanks for joining us on this journey, deep divers. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving to be the best versions of yourselves.